Hi there, and welcome to A Song of Ice and Fire Explained. This is a video series where we explain the massive conspiracies going on in A Song of Ice and Fire. If you haven't seen our previous videos, we suggest watching those first. So let's continue on with Tyrion 2, A Game of Thrones. This chapter is 3,546 words long and is told from the perspective of Tyrion Lannister, the younger brother of Jaime and Cersei Lannister. In this chapter, as Tyrion and Jon Snow travel north to the Wall, they argue about the realities of what the Night's Watch really is. This chapter develops Tyrion and Jon's friendship, first hinted at in Jon 1, and sets up Tyrion's obsession with dragons to the reader. After a fortnight riding north from Winterfell, Tyrion is astonished by the enormous size of the north. He is traveling with Benjen Stark, Jon Snow, and 2 of his own retainers. Despite knowing the maps of the region as well as anyone, the land is bigger than he imagined. It has also grown colder, quieter, and far lonelier the further north they go, and the King's Road has narrowed to a wild track. 3 days out of Winterfell, the farmland has given way to the dense, dark forests of the Wolfswood. There, they meet up with Yoren, a brother of the Night's Watch, who is an interesting character and is suspected by some of being a spy for Varys. Anyway, Yoren is accompanied by 2 peasant boys condemned to join the Watch. That night, Tyrion notices Jon Snow looking at their new companions with dismay and feels sorry for the boy who has had such a hard life chosen for him. Tyrion feels less sympathy for Benjen Stark, who apparently shares his brother's distaste for Lannisters and seems intent on making Tyrion's journey north as uncomfortable as possible. However, Tyrion does take a small bit of revenge when he accepts a tattered old bearskin cloak from Benjen, a gift Tyrion thinks Benjen did not expect him to accept and is probably regretting. By the 18th night of their journey, the inns and settlements have long since disappeared, forcing the party to make camp. Being too small to help, Tyrion, as is his custom, goes away from the camp with a book about dragons, one of several brought with him from Winterfell. Tyrion has always been interested in dragons. He remembers seeking out the dragon skulls in King's Landing the first time he was there. He recalls having a torch with him when he discovered the skulls and having the sensation that they seemed to like it when he put his torch to them. There were 3 skulls much larger than the others, and one of the skulls could have swallowed a mammoth whole. Tyrion recalls that King Loren I, an ancestor of the Lannisters, had been about to defeat the Targaryen army when Aegon and his 2 sisters unleashed all 3 of their dragons and savaged the armies of the Reach and Westerlands, killing King Mern of the Reach while King Loren bent the knee. As Tyrion reads, he is approached by Jon Snow, who asks why he reads so much. He closed the book on a finger and said, "Look at me and tell me what you see." The boy looked at him suspiciously. "Is this some kind of trick? I see you, Tyrion Lannister." Tyrion sighed. "You are remarkably polite for a bastard, Snow. What you see is a dwarf. You are what, 12? 14, the boy said. 14, and you're taller than I will ever be." Tyrion explains that because his body is twisted and weak, he must rely on his mind, and that a mind needs books like a sword needs a whetstone. When Jon asks what Tyrion is reading, Tyrion begins to talk about dragons and how he has fantasized about them since he was a child, because of the resentment he feels towards his family. When Tyrion goes so far as to suggest that Jon must feel resentment towards his own family, Jon protests. However, Tyrion continues to push the issue, sarcastically describing how Lady Catelyn treats him, how Robb is only kind to him because he is the heir, and how Ned Stark must have had a good reason to pack Jon off to the Wall. When Jon replies that the Night's Watch is a noble cause, Tyrion describes the Watch as a dunghill heap for the realm's rapers, debtors, poachers, thieves, and bastards, all kept busy watching for imaginary grumpkins and snarks. When Jon asks him to stop, Tyrion realizes what he has been saying and feels badly. Reaching out to comfort Jon, he is attacked and knocked down by Jon's direwolf, Ghost. Unable to get up on his own, Tyrion is forced to apologize to Jon before receiving help. When Tyrion questions why the wolf attacked, Jon jokes that Ghost must have mistaken Tyrion for a grumpkin, which amuses them both. Having calmed down, Jon asks Tyrion if the things he said of the Night's Watch were true. When Tyrion says yes, Jon accepts the truth grimly. The two share some wine and return to camp for a supper of squirrel stew. Tyrion is the last to retire, and Jon has the first watch. Tyrion feels sorry for the boy. And this is where Tyrion 2, A Game of Thrones ends. This chapter mostly sets up Tyrion and Jon's friendship, which is interesting because if Tyrion becomes an advisor to Dany, he might be the bridge that brings Dany and Jon together. This chapter sets up Tyrion's macabre obsession with dragons and resentment of his own family, which cleverly foreshadows his desire for Daenerys to bring fire and blood upon his own house in a dance with dragons, showing that George loves to foreshadow events and character arcs books in advance. After A Clash of Kings, or the first half of A Storm of Swords, you couldn't imagine Tyrion going off to join Daenerys in Slaver's Bay. But this chapter sets up both Tyrion's desire and motivation to do so. This chapter also introduces Tyrion's guards, Jaik and Morik. Morik serves as Tyrion's groom, cook, body servant, but not a true bodyguard, which leaves Jaik as the real guardsman. And that's about it for Tyrion 2, A Game of Thrones. In the next video, we'll cover Catelyn 3 and continue from there. In the meantime, here's the only real difference between the HBO TV show and book. In the TV series, Yoren doesn't appear in the scene with the two rapists. The book also doesn't specify that Rast is one of the captive rapists. In the show, Tyrion does tease Jon by describing what low-life scums his new brothers are, but is not knocked to the ground by Ghost, like he is in the book. Then, there's also an additional scene where Jon arrives at the wall and stares at it in awe. So, let's continue on with Catelyn 3, A Game of Thrones. This chapter is 3,863 words long, and is told from the perspective of Catelyn Stark, the older sister of Edmure and Lysa Tully. In this chapter, Catelyn's breakdown over Bran's fall ends when an attempt is made on Bran's life. Catelyn delays the assassin long enough for Bran's direwolf to arrive and kill the assassin. Catelyn is now convinced Bran did not fall, but was pushed. This chapter sets in motion the events that would lead to Catelyn's journey south that ends with her apprehending Tyrion and triggering the War of the Five Kings. However, the mystery of who sent the cat's paw still remains not definitely answered. 8 days after Eddard and the others have left Winterfell, Catelyn is still sitting at Bran's bedside in her fragile mental state. Maester Luwin comes to tell her how much the royal visit has cost, but Catelyn is not interested in looking at figures. Regardless, the Maester continues to speak of replacing provisions. Catelyn insists that the steward can worry about such matters. Luwin reminds her that Vayon Pool went south with Lord Eddard and needs to be replaced, along with a number of other positions. Catelyn is outraged that he can think of such trivial things when Bran is dying, until Robb arrives to take charge of the appointments. After the Maester leaves, Robb asks Catelyn what she thinks she's doing spending all her time with Bran, and not even saying farewell to her own family. Catelyn insists she can't bear to be away from Bran, in case he should die. Robb assures her that Bran is not going to die and reminds her that her other children need her too. He goes on to explain that Rickon just follows him around all day, crying, thinking everyone has abandoned him. Robb hears a direwolf howling outside and opens the window, explaining that the sound seems to be good for Bran. When the other direwolves join in, Catelyn screams for Robb to make the noise stop, and then collapses to the floor. Robb helps her up, and she only begins screaming again. Then Robb notices the dogs barking as well, and sees the library tower afire. When Robb rushes off to fight the fire, Catelyn remains behind with Bran. When she turns away from the window, however, she is face to face with a filthy man brandishing a knife. The man claims that Catelyn was not supposed to be there, and moves towards Bran, claiming that killing him would be a mercy. Catelyn attempts to scream for help, but the man is too quick as he moves to slit her throat. Catelyn manages to grab the blade with her hands and push it away, slicing her fingers badly. She bites the man's hand and fights her way free. The man is about to attack her again when Bran's direwolf leaps onto him and rips out his throat. Once the man is dead, the direwolf settles down on Bran's bed. Catelyn is taken back to her chambers. Old Nan undresses her and helps her into a bath. After the bath, Maester Luwin dresses Catelyn's wounds. Her fingers are cut almost to the bone, and the man had pulled out a handful of hair. The Maester gives her milk of the poppy, which puts her to sleep. She wakes up 4 days later. It seems like a nightmare. but the pain in her hands reminds her that it was real. When Catelyn remembers her behaviors since Bran's fall, she is ashamed, promising herself that it will not happen again. Robb, now wearing armor and a sword, comes to see her with Theon Greyjoy, Sir Roderick Castle, and Hallis Mullen, the new captain of the guard. Hal tells her that nobody knows who the man was, but he'd likely been lurking in the stables since the king's visit. Where the man had been hiding, they'd found 90 silver stags hidden under straw. When Robb asks why anybody would want to kill Bran, Catelyn insists that as a lord, he must learn to answer his own question. Robb guesses that somebody is afraid of what Bran might do or say if he wakes up, and so posts a heavy guard on Bran. Roderick points out that the dagger used by the assassin, a Valyrian steel blade with a dragon bone handle, is much finer weapon than anything the low-born footpad should have possessed. Someone must have given it to him. Catelyn then tells Roderick, Theon, and Robb in strict confidence of her sister Lysa's suspicions about the death of Jon Arryn. She reminds them that Jaime Lannister did not go hunting with the others the day Bran fell, and that she does not believe that Bran fell, but that he was pushed. The group admits that this is a reasonable conclusion. However, Maester Luwin points out that all they have is conjecture, and that they must have proof or else keep silent. After some deliberation, Catelyn decides that she and Roderick will go to King's Landing by ship to inform Eddard, hopefully arriving ahead of the King's party. And this is where Catelyn 3, A Game of Thrones ends. Now, here is further evidence for why Mance Rayder might have been the one who sent the Cat's Paw. Firstly, the Cat's Paw tells Catelyn that killing Bran, it's a mercy, and the only other place in Westeros that openly talks about murdering defective children as a mercy is north of the Wall. Val tells Jon, north of the Wall it is. Hemlock is a sure cure, but a pillow or a blade will work as well. If I had given birth to that poor child, I should have given her the gift of mercy long ago. So, if Mance hired the Cat's Paw, he might have used the wording, it's a mercy, and the Cat's Paw recycled this when justifying his attack to Catelyn. The final piece of evidence comes from a Clash of Kings, when Jorah Mormont tells Jon each king north of the Wall have always failed because of one fundamental problem. Each man of them broke his strength on the Wall, or was broken by the power of Winterfell on the far side. But the Night's Watch is only a shadow of what we were. And who remains to oppose the wildlings beside us? The Lord of Winterfell is dead, and his heir has marched his strength south to fight the Lannisters. The wildlings may never again have such a chance at this. And Mance knows this, so it would be pretty impressive if this was all instigated by Mance himself, since he recognized the past mistakes of all the wildling kings before him. What to do about the Starks of Winterfell? Well, the answer is simple. Force them to play the Game of Thrones, and if Mance is Sir Arthur Dayne, he'd know exactly how to do this, despite living north of the Wall since Robert's Rebellion. And that's about it for Catelyn 3, A Game of Thrones. In the next video, we'll cover Sansa 1 and continue from there. In the meantime, here are some of the other differences between the HBO TV show and book. An additional scene in the TV series where Catelyn searches the old tower and finds a golden hair. She suspects that the Lannisters are involved in Bran's accident even before finding out that the dagger is Valyrian steel. In the TV series, the Winterfell meeting between Catelyn, Robb, Theon, Sir Roderick, and Maester Luwin takes place in the Godswood instead of in the castle. In the book, Catelyn does not generally suspect the Lannisters of Bran's fall, nor does she doubt their loyalty to the crown. Instead, she suspects Jaime, mentioning how he did not join the hunt the day Bran fell, but remained inside Winterfell. So, let's continue on with Sansa 1, A Game of Thrones. This chapter is 5,085 words long, and is told from the perspective of Sansa Stark, the eldest daughter of Eddard and Catelyn Stark. In this chapter, after exploring the camp, Sansa Stark goes riding with her betrothed, Prince Joffrey, near the Ruby Ford. They come upon Arya Stark and a butcher's boy play fighting. Joffrey begins to torment the boy until Arya attacks him. Sansa is having breakfast with Septa Mordane inside an inn near the Trident, when Sansa feeds her direwolf Lady under the table. The Septa says that although Sansa is a good girl, she is as willful as her sister Arya when it comes to her direwolf. Septa Mordane informs Sansa that they have been invited to ride in the wheelhouse with Queen Cersei and Princess Marcilla. Sansa has been looking forward to this for a week, hoping for a chance to be with her prince. Joffrey is everything she ever wanted her prince to be like. Tall and strong and handsome. The one thing Sansa is afraid of is that Arya will ruin everything for her. Septa Mordane wants Sansa and Arya to dress well for the event, and Sansa has already decided on a fine silk dress. She does not expect Arya to wear anything appropriate. Sansa begs to be excused so she can look for Arya. She finds her sister on the banks of the Trident, trying to comb the mud out of her direwolf Nymeria's fur. Arya is not interested in riding in the wheelhouse, and intends to go riding with Micah to look for rubies in the river. Sansa insists that there is no fun in riding because there is nothing to see, but Arya is fascinated by all the new flowers and landmarks and people they are seeing along the way. Sansa informs Arya that she has to come, asking why anyone would want to ride a stinky horse when they could ride in the wheelhouse on pillows, while eating lemon cakes and keeping company with the Queen. Arya replies that she does not even like the Queen and still intends to go riding. Sansa, giving up, leaves, but Arya yells after her that Lady will not be allowed in the wheelhouse, which leaves Sansa speechless. When she nears the camp, Sansa sees a crowd gathered around the wheelhouse. The council has sent an honor guard from King's Landing to accompany them the rest of the way. The party includes 2 knights in fine armor, a strong old man in white armor, and a beautiful young man in green armor. There is also a gaunt, grim man that Sansa finds so terrifying she backs right into the hound. Sansa kneels and hugs Lady, and next thing she knows, the 2 new arrivals are standing above her. Joffrey explains that the terrifying man is Sir Ilan Payne, the King's Justice, or Royal Executioner. The White Knight then introduces himself as Sir Barristan Selmy, Lord Commander of the King's Guard, but the Green Knight insists that she can guess who he is, based off his age and antlered helm. Sansa correctly deduces him to be the King's youngest brother, Lord Renly Baratheon. Feeling more comfortable, Sansa apologizes to Sir Ilan Payne, but the man does not speak. Once he has left, Joffrey explains that his tongue was ripped out by Mad King Aerys. The Queen says that she must speak with the councillors, and therefore must postpone the day with Marcella. Instead, she asks Joffrey to entertain her, and Sansa is overjoyed with the idea of a whole day with her prince. Sansa offers to do whatever Joffrey wants, and when he suggests that they go riding, Sansa gushes that she loves riding. Joffrey then suggests that it would be best to leave Lady and his dog, Sandor Clegane, behind. "If you like," she said uncertainly. "I suppose I could tie Lady up." She did not quite understand though. "I didn't know you had a dog." Joffrey laughed. "He's my mother's dog, in truth. She has set him to guard me, and so he does." "You mean the hound?" she said. She wanted to hit herself for being so slow. Her prince would never love her if she seemed stupid. "Is it safe to leave him behind?" Prince Joffrey looked annoyed that she would even ask. "Have no fear, lady. I am almost a man grown, and I don't fight with wood like your brothers." Joffrey brandishes his sword, Lion's Tooth. They ride along the river, exploring the countryside until they draw near to the battlefield where King Robert defeated Rhaegar Targaryen. Then they hear an odd sound, like wooden clattering, coming from nearby. In a nearby clearing, they find a boy and a girl play fighting with sticks. The boy, taller and older than the girl, is winning. When the girl is disarmed by a smack on the hand, Sansa recognizes her as Arya. Joffrey laughs, and the boy, a butcher's boy named Micah, drops his stick. Joffrey begins to taunt Micah and challenges him to a fight, sword against stick. Micah insists that Arya asked him to fight her, which Sansa quickly realizes is the truth. Joffrey remains oblivious, however, and goes so far as to prick the boy's cheek with his sword. Arya picks up her stick and tells Joffrey to leave Micah alone. Joffrey insists that he will not hurt Micah much. Without warning, Arya breaks her stick over the back of Joffrey's head. Micah runs away, while an enraged Joffrey staggers, but manages to catch a second blow from Arya on his sword, knocking the splintered stick from her hand. Ignoring Sansa's screams for them to stop, Arya throws a rock and hits Joffrey's horse, driving it away. Joffrey chases Arya with his sword until she is backed up against a tree. Nymeria appears and savages Joffrey's sword arm, forcing him to drop his sword. Arya calls Nymeria off and picks up Lion's Tooth while Joffrey lies whimpering on the ground and pleads for Arya not to hurt him. Arya throws his sword into the river before running off with Nymeria. Once Arya is gone, Sansa goes to help Joffrey tenderly, but he snarls at her to leave and not touch him, and Sansa can see only the vilest contempt in his eyes for her. and this is where Sansa 1, A Game of Thrones ends. This chapter makes clear that Joffrey is a psycho, and that Arya's dislike of Sansa is mutual. Moreover, the rubies that Arya and Micah go searching for pop up in our story a lot. For example, in a conversation between elder brother Brienne and Sir Hyle, the elder tells them, "Where the river meets the bay, the currents and the tides wrestle one against the other, and many strange and wondrous things are pushed towards us to wash up on our shores. We have found silver cups and iron pots, sacks of wool and bolts of silk, rusted helms and shining swords, aye, and rubies." That interested Sir Hyle. Rhaegar's rubies? It may be, who can say? The battle was long leagues from here, but the river is tireless and patient. 6 have been found. We are all waiting for the 7th. Also, in A Clash of Kings, Daenerys visits the House of the Undying and has a vision where rubies flew like drops of blood from the chest of a dying prince, and he sank to his knees in the water and with his last breath murmured a woman's name. So these rubies do come up a lot throughout the books. Anyway, that's about it for Sansa 1, A Game of Thrones. In the next video, we'll cover Eddard 3 and continue from there. In the meantime, here are some of the other differences between the HBO TV show and book. In the TV series, there is no conversation between Sansa and Arya about riding in a wheelhouse. Instead, at the Trident, Sansa first appears when she meets Sir Ilan Payne and the Hound. In the TV series, Barristan Selmy and Renly don't appear at the Trident. Only Ilan Payne arrives and scares Sansa. In the book, Sansa and Joffrey go riding around the Trident, and they are away for a long time before they find Arya. In the TV series, they go only for a short walk and find Arya nearby. The TV series also shows what happens to Nymeria after she wounds Joffrey. In the show, it's clearly seen that Arya throws a stone at Nymeria and sends her away. In the book, Arya mentions this scene after she's brought back. The event happens after Jory finds her, and together they throw several stones at her. So let's continue on with Eddard 3, A Game of Thrones. This chapter is 3,321 words long, and is told from the perspective of Eddard Stark, who was 35 years old at the start of A Song of Ice and Fire. In this chapter, Arya and Joffrey tell King Robert very different stories concerning their fight near the Trident. When Sansa claims she does not remember, Queen Cersei demands the death of a direwolf. With Nymeria gone, Lady is sentenced to death instead. After 4 days of searching, Vayon Poole comes to Ned with news that Arya has been found unharmed. Ned is relieved that it was Jory Castle who found her rather than Queen Cersei's men. Unfortunately, the Lannister guards at the gate informed the Queen, who had Arya brought directly before King Robert. Ned rushes to the audience chamber of nearby Castle Darry, which has been hosting the King's party during the search. However, House Darry are not friends of Robert. The royal party had made themselves the uninvited guests of its lord, Sir Raymond Darry, while the hunt for Arya and the butcher's boy was conducted on both sides of the river. They were not welcome visitors. Sir Raymond lived under the king's peace, but his family had fought beneath Rhaegar's dragon banners at the Trident, and his 3 older brothers had died there, a truth neither Robert nor Sir Raymond had forgotten. Ned is dismayed to find the chamber full of people, preventing a private and amicable solution. Ned notes that very few in the crowd are likely to be sympathetic to the Starks. Most are either Lannister men or loyal to Lord Raymond Darry, a prominent Targaryen loyalist. However, Ned is relieved that neither Jaime nor Sandor are present. Arya apologizes to him as she cries. Ned turns angrily to the king, demanding to know why Arya was not brought to him first. Queen Cersei bristles at his tone, but Robert apologizes, explaining that he only wanted to finish the business quickly. Cersei then accuses Arya and Micah of ambushing Joffrey with clubs while setting Nymeria to tear off his arm. When Joffrey affirms this, Arya calls him a liar. Then the king listens to Arya's side of the story. When she got to the part where she threw Joffrey's sword into the middle of the Trident, Renly Baratheon began to laugh. The king bristled. "Sir Barristan, escort my brother from the hall before he chokes." Lord Renly stifled his laughter. "My brother is too kind. I can find the door myself." He bowed to Joffrey. "Perchance later you'll tell me how a 9-year-old girl managed to disarm you with a broom handle and throw your sword in the river." When Joffrey recounts a very different story, King Robert is exasperated. Ned reminds the king that Sansa was also present and has Sansa brought in to testify. However, Sansa, torn between her family and her love for Joffrey, claims she doesn't remember. This infuriates Arya, who lunges at Sansa. Cersei uses this as an example of how wild Arya is, and insists she wants Arya punished. King Robert, even more exasperated, orders Ned to discipline Arya while he will discipline Joffrey. Unsatisfied, Cersei demands that Nymeria be killed and offers 100 gold dragons for her pelt. However, since Nymeria has disappeared, Cersei demands the skin of the other direwolf. When Ned protests, Robert only responds that a direwolf is not a pet and that the girl would be happier with a dog. Sansa finally realizes that they are talking about her direwolf and goes crying to Ned. In a final attempt to save the direwolf, Ned insists that the king executes the wolf himself, but Robert only walks away. Ned refuses to let Ilyn Payne do the task. When Cersei voices suspicion about Ned's intentions, Ned replies that the direwolf is from the north and deserves better than a butcher. With Sansa's cries in his ears, Ned goes to Lady, and he sits beside the wolf, waiting for his sword. Ned considers the names his children chose for their wolves and finds that Sansa chose a good name for her well-behaved wolf, and the deed is done. Ned commands 4 guardsmen to return Lady's body to Winterfell for burial, insisting that Cersei will never have her skin. As he is returning, Sandor Clegane and his riders come back from the hunt. Clegane states that while they didn't find Arya, they did find her pet and drops a corpse at Ned's feet. As he bends to uncover the corpse, Ned wonders how he will tell Arya. However, rather than Nymeria, the body turns out to be Arya's friend Mycah, cut down from horseback. When Ned states that Clegane ran the boy down, the burned man responds, "He ran, but not very fast." And this is where Eddard 3, A Game of Thrones ends. However, we find out later in Eddard 7 that Robert actually knows Arya told the truth. "I am sorry for your girl, Ned. Truly. About the wolf, I mean. My son was lying. I'd stake my soul on it." Then, in Davos 6, A Storm of Swords, we learn from Stannis that one told Joffrey, the boy, that she had kittens in her belly, thinking he might want one. Joffrey opened up the poor thing with a dagger to see if it were true. When he found the kittens, he brought them to show his father. Robert hit the boy so hard, I thought he'd killed him. Anyway, that's about it for Eddard 3, A Game of Thrones. In the next video, we'll cover Bran 3 and continue from there. In the meantime, here are some of the differences between the HBO TV show and book. In the book, Arya is missing for 4 days. When found, she is taken before Robert. It doesn't take place at Castle Darry, but at an inn at the crossroads. Jory, who finds Arya in the books, not Lannister soldiers. In the book, when Sansa lies that she does not remember what happened, Arya knocks her down to the ground, beating her. In the show, Renly is not present, and it's Robert who scolds Joffrey for letting a little girl disarm him. In the show, Eddard executes Lady with a dagger. In the book, he uses the great sword Ice, and Robert initially complies to Cersei's demand that Lady be killed in place of Nymeria. However, when Ned beseeches him to reconsider, invoking his sister Lyanna, Robert turns back towards Cersei and curses her. Ned also goes on to tell Robert to do the deed himself, but Robert walks away in shame. In the TV show, Ned protests against killing Lady, but he doesn't invoke Lyanna's name, and Robert shows no concern for Lady or Sansa before the former is killed, nor does he express any remorse later on. In the TV show, Eddard doesn't order Lady's body be taken back to the north. In the books, the Hound tosses Mycah's body in front of Ned, while in the show, Sandor doesn't stop nor talk to Eddard when he brings the body. Furthermore, Lady was killed before Eddard sees Mycah's body in the book. The order of the events was swapped, and in the show, Bran doesn't have dreams about the three-eyed crow before he wakes up in the show. Meanwhile, in Bran 3, these crow dreams wake him up. In the TV series, he wakes up when Sansa's direwolf is executed. The book does not indicate any connection between Lady's death and Bran's awakening. So, let's continue on with Bran 3, A Game of Thrones. This chapter is 1,708 words long, and is told from the perspective of Bran Stark, who was 8 years old at the start of A Song of Ice and Fire. In this chapter, while in his coma, Bran dreams of falling, and of a crow teaching him to fly. He sees the bodies of 1,000 dreamers before flying. Then he wakes to find himself crippled and decides to name his direwolf Summer. Bran is dreaming of falling. It seems that he has been falling for years, but I never fall, he remembers as he falls. As the ground gets closer, Bran believes that he will wake up in the instant before he hits the ground, like he always has before. And if you don't, asks the voice, a crow is with him, telling him to fly. Bran insists that he does not know how to fly. The crow asks him if he has ever tried. Bran then asks the crow if he is really a crow, and the crow asks Bran if he is really falling. Bran begins to cry, but the crow insists the answer is flying, not crying, and that flying is easy. When Bran mentions that the crow has wings, the crow says maybe Bran does too. When Bran searches himself for wings, the crow tells him there are different kinds of wings. Bran asks the crow what he is doing, and the crow responds that he is teaching Bran to fly. When Bran looks down again, he can see the whole realm and everything in it. In Winterfell, he sees the inhabitants going about their work and sees the heart tree in the Godswood looking back at him. Bran sees his mother contemplating a blood-stained knife aboard a ship sailing on the Bight, and his father pleading with the king near the Trident. He sees Sansa crying herself to sleep and Arya holding her secrets in her heart. All around his family, Bran sees shadows, one as dark as ash with the terrible face of a hound, and another in armor as golden and beautiful as the sun. Over them all looms a giant armored in stone, but with only darkness and black blood behind its visor. In the far east, Bran sees dragons stirring in the fabled Shadowlands. Bran turns north to the Wall, where he sees Jon sleeping alone and growing cold and hard. Then Bran looks beyond the Wall, and beyond the curtain of light, at the edge of the world, into what he calls the heart of winter. What he sees there makes him cry. The crow tells Bran that now he knows why he must live, because winter is coming. Bran realizes that the crow has a third eye, full of terrible knowledge. Bran can see spires of ice rising up to impale him, and the bodies of 1,000 dreamers before him. The three-eyed crow tells Bran that he must choose, fly or die. Bran spreads his arms and flies. The crow reacts by pecking at Bran's face between his eyes, blinding him. Suddenly, the crow dissolves into a serving woman with long black hair. Bran realizes he is in Winterfell. The serving woman drops her basin and runs down the steps shouting, "He is awake!" Bran touches the burning space between his eyes, where he was pecked, but cannot feel a thing. Bran's direwolf jumps up onto his legs, but Bran cannot feel it. When his brother Robb arrives, Bran looks up calmly and says, his name is Summer. And this is where Bran 3, A Game of Thrones, ends. Now, as we've said before, we don't think the three-eyed crow is Bloodraven, and is instead the most dangerous greenseer in Westeros. For example, the three-eyed crow seems to make Bran forget that Jaime Lannister pushed him from the broken tower. A face swam up at him out of the grey mist, shining with light, golden. "The things I do for love," it said. Bran screamed. The crow took to the air, cawing. "Not that," it shrieked at him. "Forget that. You do not need it now. Put it aside. Put it away." It landed on Bran's shoulder and pecked at him, and the shining golden face was gone. We say partially forgot because in Bran 4, A Clash of Kings, this exchange happens between Jojen and Bran. "It was only a bad dream," Jojen stood. "I felt you. I felt you fall. Is that what scares you? The falling?" "The falling," Bran thought. "And the golden man, the queen's brother, he scares me too. But mostly the falling." He did not say it though. How could he? He had not been able to tell Sir Roderick or Maester Luwin. And he could not tell the Reeds either. If he didn't talk about it, maybe he would forget. He had never wanted to remember. It might not even be a true remembering. "Do you fall every night, Bran?" Jojen asked quietly. So the three-eyed crow wanted Bran to fall, to awaken his third eye by forcing him to fly. But the three-eyed crow didn't want to spark war between the Lannisters and Starks. Not yet. Not until Theon could seize Winterfell and skin the Miller's boys, allowing Bran, Jojen, Mira, and Hodor to escape north of the Wall. Also, during Bran's dreams, he sees they flew up at him like spears. He saw the bones of 1,000 other dreamers impaled upon their points. Which makes you wonder if Euron saw the same thing when he was younger. Or did he fail to fly and become a failed dreamer. Moreover, the three-eyed crow has an attitude, or personality, that doesn't gel with Bloodraven. A crow was spiraling down with him, just out of reach, following him as he fell. "Help me," he said. "I'm trying," the crow replied. "Say, got any corn?" Or later, when the crow says, "That won't do any good," the crow said. "I told you, the answer is flying, not crying. How hard can it be? I'm doing it." We can't really imagine the stoic, wizened, solemn Bloodraven saying this stuff to Bran, when you compare it to the stuff he says to Bran in the cave. "I saw your birth, and that of your lord father before you. I saw your first step, heard your first word, was part of your first dream. I was watching when you fell, and now you are come to me at last." They sound like two different people. Also, why doesn't Bloodraven mention that he was the one talking to Bran in his dreams? Anyway, that's about it for Bran 3, A Game of Thrones. In the next video, we'll cover Catelyn 4 and continue from there. In the meantime, here is the biggest difference between the TV show and book. In the show, there is no mention of Bran dreaming about the three-eyed crow at all, and instead wakes up after Lady is killed. So let's continue on with Catelyn 4, A Game of Thrones. This chapter is 4,022 words long, and is told from the perspective of Catelyn Stark, who was 34 years old at the start of A Song of Ice and Fire. In this chapter, Catelyn and Sir Roderick arrive in King's Landing by ship. Catelyn is intercepted by Littlefinger and brought to the Red Keep. At a secret meeting with Peter Baelish and Varys, Catelyn is told the assassin's knife belonged to Tyrion Lannister. As their ship, Stormdancer, prepares to dock in King's Landing, Catelyn is joined on deck by Sir Roderick Castle. Catelyn notes that Roderick looks much better than he has for days. Roderick has been chronically seasick throughout the voyage, forcing him to shave his befouled cheek whiskers. After Captain Morio Tamitus leaves them, Catelyn and Roderick discuss how to go about their investigation of the dagger. Catelyn suggests speaking to the Red Keep's Master-at-Arms, Sir Aron Santagar, who may recognize the weapon. Roderick reminds Catelyn that they must be careful she is not recognized. This brings Lord Peter Baelish, the King's Master of Coin, to Catelyn's mind. Littlefinger, a nickname given to him by Catelyn's brother Edmure, was raised with her at Riverrun as her father Hoster's ward. They had been close until Peter had challenged Catelyn's betrothed, Brandon Stark, for her hand. Brandon had only spared Peter because Catelyn had pleaded for his life. After his recovery, Peter had been sent away and Catelyn had not seen him since. Roderick proposes that he go to the Red Keep alone because without his whiskers, he is unrecognizable, even to the few who might know him. After they disembark, Catelyn and Roderick move into a modest old inn suggested by the ship's captain. After Roderick leaves, Catelyn tries to get some sleep, but is woken by the city watch of King's Landing. They show her a seal depicting a mockingbird in grey wax, the sigil of Peter Baelish. As she prepares to accompany the soldiers who don't recognize her, Catelyn wonders how Peter knew she was in King's Landing and settles on Stormdancer's captain as the culprit. Catelyn is escorted to a tower room occupied by Peter. When Catelyn asks how he knew she was here, Peter replies that Varys knows everything that happens in the city. He does admit, however, that Varys does not know the reason for Catelyn's visit. Catelyn lies that she merely yearned to see her husband and daughters. Peter does not believe this for a moment and asks Catelyn to let him help, making her repeat the Tully words: family, duty, honor. Before Catelyn can say any more, they are joined by Varys. After profuse courtesies, Varys asks to see the dagger. Catelyn is astonished by Varys' knowledge of things no one could possibly know and produces the dagger for inspection. Peter reveals that it once belonged to him until he lost it in betting on Sir Jaime Lannister in the tourney on Prince Joffrey's name day. Peter explains that when Jaime was unhorsed by Sir Loras Tyrell, Peter's dagger was won by Tyrion Lannister. And this is where Catelyn 4, A Game of Thrones, ends. Now, this chapter actually introduces the biggest plot hole in A Song of Ice and Fire, and that is, why didn't Tyrion do anything to Littlefinger when they both know Peter lied about the dagger? Preston Jacobs just did a podcast on this a couple of weeks ago, so link is in the description if you want to listen. But anyway, as Hand of the King, Tyrion doesn't execute Littlefinger, even though that's exactly what Tywin told him to do in Tyrion 9. And if these counselors are playing us false, Tyrion knew. Spikes, he sighed. Heads, walls. I see you have taken a few lessons from me." "More than you know, father," Tyrion answered quietly. But then, in Tyrion 4, A Clash of Kings, he monologues to himself. "But do I dare touch him?" Tyrion wondered. Even if he is a traitor, he was not at all certain he could, least of all now, while the war raged. Given time, he could replace Littlefinger's men with his own in key positions. Now, you might also be thinking, why didn't Varys out Littlefinger? Well, as we learn in Arya 3, Varys thinks that the Lannisters did it anyway. The fools tried to kill his son, and what's worse, they made a murmur's farce of it. He's not a man to put that aside. I warn you, the wolf and lion will soon be at each other's throats, whether we will it or no. Also, it's interesting to think what would have happened if Varys hadn't told Littlefinger about Catelyn's arrival to King's Landing. During the chapter, Catelyn asks, "Why you?" He shrugged. "Why not me? I am Master of Coin, the King's own counsellor. Selmy and Lord Renly rode north to meet Robert, and Lord Stannis is gone to Dragonstone, leaving only Maester Pycelle and me. I was the obvious choice. I was ever a friend to your sister Lysa. Varys knows that." If Varys wanted to know why Catelyn had come, he could have sent Varys to Selmy, Lord Stannis, or even Renly had they been present, but instead had to settle for Littlefinger, who of course exploited the situation to his advantage and started the War of the Five Kings. And that's about it for Catelyn 4, A Game of Thrones. In the next video, we'll cover Jon 3 and continue from there. In the meantime, here are some of the other differences between the HBO TV show and book. In the book, Catelyn and Sir Roderick arrive at King's Landing by ship from White Harbour. In the show, they come by riding horses on the King's Road. In the book, Catelyn and Roderick arrive before Eddard and the royal party, while in the show, they arrive afterwards. In the book, Catelyn and Roderick go to an inn, while in the show, they are both taken to a brothel that Littlefinger owns by several gold cloaks. The show gives the explanation that Catelyn would be easily noticed if she went to the Red Keep. Also, in the show, Varys claims not to know who the dagger belongs to, while in the book, Peter doesn't give Varys the chance to reveal it belongs to him. So, let's continue on with Jon 3, A Game of Thrones. This chapter is 5,185 words long, and is told from the perspective of Jon Snow, who was 14 years old at the start of A Song of Ice and Fire. In this chapter, after training, Jon Snow is attacked by several other recruits, but saved by Donal Noye, who shows Jon the error of his ways. Then Jon meets up with Tyrion, and later learns from the Lord Commander that Bran has awoken. Jon is training with the other recruits under Castle Black's Master-at-Arms, Sir Alistair Thorne. Jon is by far the most skilled swordsman, and during a sparring match, he accidentally injures Gren's wrist. Disgusted with the recruits, Thorne calls an end to the training. Jon knew better than to reply. He had beaten everyone that Sir Alistair had sent against him, yet it gained him nothing. The Master-at-Arms served up only derision. Thorne hated him, Jon had decided. Of course, he hated the other boys even worse. Thorne mercilessly berates them all and has given Jon the nickname Lord Snow, in mockery of Jon's bastard status. To Jon's annoyance, everyone has taken up using the name. Jon has found Castle Black cold and the people colder. He has no friends among the 20 recruits and finds that he despises them more as time goes by. Jon resents that nobody but Tyrion Lannister told him that the war would be like this. The fact that even his father never told him makes it hurt all the worse. Even Jon's uncle Benjen seems to have abandoned him, becoming a very different man who spends all his time among the high officers. 3 days after arriving at the wall, Jon had pleaded to be allowed to come on arranging with his uncle. Benjen had told him that he was just a boy who had yet to earn the right to go. Benjen also explained that, while he loved his family, the men of the Night's Watch are his true brothers. The next morning, Benjen had smiles, but not for Jon, telling him that they would speak when he returns. Jon goes to his sleeping cell to be with Ghost, thinking of how much he misses his family. His thoughts are interrupted by the arrival of Gren, Toad, and 2 other recruits. All of them are brutes and bullies, sent to the wall for crimes. After Gren insults Jon's mother, a short fight breaks out that soon has Jon on the ground. However, before the boys can hurt Jon, Donal Noye, the smith, intervenes. After the others leave, Noye tells Jon that the Night's Watch has need of every man, and that there is no honor in killing boys like Gren. When Jon insists that they insulted his mother, Noye points out that them saying it doesn't make it true. When Noi reminds Jon that he is in the Night's Watch for life, Jon reflects angrily on the fact that Donal Noi had a life before taking the Black. He feasted and wenched and fought in battles, only taking the Black after losing an arm during the siege of Storm's End. Jon claims that the others hate him because he is better than them, but Noi insists that they hate him because he thinks he is better. Noi then calls Jon a bastard and a bully. Being called a bully surprises Jon because his attackers were all older and bigger than him. Noi explains that Jon has humiliated and shamed the other recruits, who have had no formal training in swordsmanship, whereas Jon was trained by an anointed knight. Jon starts to feel ashamed, but is still angry. Noi tells him to accept his life on the wall and reconsider how he treats his companions, or else to sleep with a dagger by his bed. As he leaves, Jon looks up at the wall, a massive blue-white cliff of ice that fills up half the sky and dwarfs Castle Black beneath it. The wall is the largest structure built by men, according to Benjen, and the most useless, according to Tyrion. Older than the Seven Kingdoms, to Jon, the wall seems to represent the edge of the world. Tyrion interrupts Jon's reflection by commenting that it makes you wonder about what lies beyond. Since arriving, Jon has seen little of Tyrion, who has been an honoured guest among the high officers. When Tyrion asks Jon if he is curious about what lies beyond the wall, Jon replies that there is nothing special, but inside wishes he could have ridden with his uncle Benjen on arranging. When Tyrion calls him Lord Snow by mistake, Jon objects, but Tyrion asks whether he would prefer to be called the Imp, and reminds Jon to make his weakness his strength by accepting it. Let them see that their words can cut you, and you'll never be free of the mockery. Tyrion asks about Ghost. Jon tells him that he chains the direwolf in the old stables during training, but that the rest of the time he stays with Jon in his sleeping area in Harden's Tower. Tyrion says he thought those buildings were abandoned, but Jon explains most of the castle is abandoned, so nobody cares where a person sleeps. He continues on to tell Tyrion that he sleeps alone because the others are afraid of Ghost. Tyrion declares the others wise, then mentions that Benjen Stark is late returning from his ranging. Jon recalls that his uncle was supposed to be back by his 15th name day, which is now a fortnight past. Tyrion says that he has heard that a great number of rangers have disappeared recently. In the common hall, Jon gets food and chooses a spot away from the other recruits, and Tyrion sits opposite him. So Alliser interrupts Jon's conversation to tell him that the Lord Commander wants to speak with him about a message concerning his half-brother. Tyrion suspects the worst and gives Jon his sympathy. Jon races to the Commander's keep, where Lord Commander Jorah Mormont gives him a message from Robb at Winterfell. The message explains that Bran has woken, but is now a paraplegic. Jon, overjoyed that Bran will live, rushes back to tell Tyrion. In his joy, Jon apologizes to Grenn and offers to show him how to defend against the move that injured him. Sir Alliser sarcastically remarks that he would have an easier time teaching a wolf to juggle than training Grenn to fight. Jon replies that he will take the wager as he would love to see Ghost juggle. All the men in the hall, including Grenn, begin to laugh. As Sir Alliser clenches his fist in anger, Jon realizes that he has made himself a lifelong enemy. And this is where Jon 3, A Game of Thrones ends. It's funny to think how different Jon's story would be if he hadn't offended Alliser Thorne. But at the same time, their mutual disdain might have been inevitable. Moreover, this chapter introduces Donal Noi, probably one of the best characters omitted from the TV series. In this chapter, we learn he'd only taken the Black after he'd lost an arm at the siege of Storm's End. He'd taken a glancing blow from an axe, and the wound had festered until the whole arm had to come off. However, there isn't much fighting during a siege, except at the gate. So maybe Donal Noi was commanding the defense of a gate during a Tyrell attack, and lost his arm to an axeman who was trying to chop down the door or sever the crossbar. Anyway, as we know Storm's End didn't fall, and so Donal Noi successfully defended the gate, which is sadly poetic since Noi would die defending the gate at Castle Black from a giant. Both times he successfully defended the gate despite losing his arm the first time and his life the second time. Mag himself went in that gate of yours and never did come out. He died on the sword of a brave man named Donal Noi. Some great lord was he, this Donal Noi? One of your shiny knights? A blacksmith. He only had one arm. And that's about it for Jon 3, A Game of Thrones. In the next video, we'll cover Eddard 4 and continue from there. In the meantime, Here are the differences between the HBO TV show and book. In the show, many recruits in the Night's Watch are omitted in the series, such as Toad and Haldor, and Darien's character only makes a brief appearance. Parts of Darien's dialogue is given to Pip's character. In the first scene of The Wall, there are 3 notable recruits, Gren, Pip, and Rast. Rast also gets more screen time than in the book. In the book, Rast is called Rat and Gren is called Aurochs by Alistair Thorne. These derogatory nicknames are not mentioned in the show. In the fight with Gren, Jon breaks Gren's nose instead of Gren's wrist. He is also shown fighting more recruits in the books. Most were 2 or 3 years his senior, yet not one was half the fighter Robb had been at 14. Darien was quick, but afraid of being hit. Pip used his sword like a dagger. Jeren was as weak as a girl. Gren, slow and clumsy. Haldor's blows were brutally hard, but he ran right into your attacks. In the show, it is Tyrion, not Donal Noy, who rescues Jon from the other recruits, and chides Jon before giving him the news about Bran. So, let's continue on with Eddard IV, A Game of Thrones. This chapter is 4,770 words long, and is told from the perspective of Eddard Stark, who has the most POV chapters in A Game of Thrones, with 15. In this chapter, immediately upon his arrival in King's Landing, Ned is summoned to a meeting of the small council to plan a tournament. Afterward, Littlefinger intercepts him and leads him to where Catelyn is hiding, where they plan their strategy for justice. Ned arrives in King's Landing tired and ready for a meal and hot bath. Instead, he is immediately informed by the royal steward that there is an urgent meeting of all the small council that he must attend. After momentarily losing his temper, Ned decides it is best not to offend the council on his first day in the capital. Therefore, he tasks his own steward to see that his daughters are guided to their rooms and that Arya is not allowed to go exploring. In borrowed clothes, his are all still packed, Ned arrives to find 4 members of the council waiting for him. Littlefinger, the Master of Coin, Varys, the Master of Whisperers, Renly Baratheon, the Master of Laws, and Grand Maester Pycelle. The simpering eunuch, Varys, immediately expresses sorrow over the troubles on the road and assures Ned they are praying for Prince Joffrey's recovery. Ned coldly informs him that the prince grows stronger every day. When he sees Renly, Ned is struck by how much he looks like a young Robert. Littlefinger immediately quips that Renly is much better dressed, having spent more on clothes than many ladies of the court. Upon introducing himself to Ned for the first time, Littlefinger mentions that Catelyn has most likely mentioned him before. Ned recalls that Littlefinger also knew his brother, Brandon, adding that Brandon mentioned him often, and with some heat. Littlefinger responds that he would have thought heat did not suit the Starks, who are rumoured to be made of ice and to melt south of the neck. Ned replies that he does not plan on melting anytime soon. After a short greeting to Grand Maester Pycelle, Ned asks after the other members of the council, and is told that Stannis Baratheon left for Dragonstone shortly after the king went north, and that both Sir Barristan Selmy and King Robert are still riding through the city. When Ned suggests they wait, Renly explains that Robert finds the detail of coin and crops boring, and rarely bothers to attend. Renly says that the king sent him ahead to convene the council to handle an urgent matter, and produces a sealed letter for Ned. The king's letter contains an order that a tourney be held in honour of Ned's appointment as Hand of the King. Ned is incredulous and not particularly happy with his extravagance being held in his name. The prizes alone total 90,000 gold dragons, and the costs are sure to run high as well. When Pycelle questions whether the treasury will bear the expense, Littlefinger reveals that the crown is already over 6 million gold pieces in debt, half of it to the Lannisters. Ned is shocked. The Targaryens left a treasury overflowing with gold. He cannot believe that Jon Arryn allowed Robert to beggar the realm. But the council explains that while Lord Arryn was a prudent man, Robert did not always listen. Ned insists that this tourney is something the realm cannot afford. "Speak to him as you will," Lord Renly said. "We had still best make our plans." Ned declares that they will consider it later, then leaves abruptly. As Ned proceeds towards the Tower of the Hand, reflecting on the miseries of the last fortnight of the journey south, he is intercepted by Littlefinger, who tells him that he is going the wrong way. After a long journey through the Red Keep, Ned eventually realizes that Littlefinger is not leading him to the tower. Littlefinger explains that he is leading Ned to his wife, but Ned does not believe him. Eventually, Littlefinger brings him outside the castle, where they scale the side of a cliff and mount 2 waiting horses on the other side and ride into the city. Peter leads Ned to a brothel he owns and tells him his wife is waiting inside. Ned is furious at being taken all this way to a brothel and holds a knife to Littlefinger's throat, claiming his brother was too kind. He is interrupted by a man he eventually recognizes as Sir Roderick Castle, disarming his suspicions. Littlefinger leads Ned upstairs to meet with Catelyn, explaining that a brothel is such a good hiding place because it is so unlikely. After embracing and exchanging news with Catelyn, Ned sees the scars on her hands and she places the Valyrian steel dagger used against Bran in his hands. However, Ned cannot understand why Tyrion Lannister would have attempted to murder Bran. Littlefinger states that the reason is obvious and that Tyrion would have never acted alone. Ned tries to assure himself that Robert couldn't have been involved in this, but he remembers all the horrid things that the king has either supported or ignored. Queen Cersei, on the other hand, Ned has no trouble believing to be responsible. Littlefinger reminds him that to accuse either is treason, but if they can find proof of Cersei's involvement, it is possible the king will listen. Ned feels that he should take his case and the dagger directly to the king, but Littlefinger reminds him that there is no solid proof that Tyrion was involved. Then Catelyn explains that she has told Littlefinger about their suspicions concerning Jon Arryn's death, and that Littlefinger has promised to help them learn the truth. When Ned asks how much Varys knows about all of this, he is told that Varys has not been told, but Catelyn warns that he knows things no normal man has any way of knowing. Ned then asks Littlefinger to give him time alone with his wife. Littlefinger asks if they want time in a bedchamber, but Catelyn tells him that will not be necessary. They just need a little time. Catelyn goes to Littlefinger and tells him that she appreciates his efforts and has found a brother that she thought she had lost. Ned is not so confident that Littlefinger can be trusted, but says nothing. After Littlefinger leaves, when the door had closed behind him, Ned turned back to his wife. "Once you are home, send word to Helman Talhart and Galbart Glover under my seal. They are to raise 100 bowmen each and fortify Moat Catelyn. 200 determined archers can hold the neck against an army. Instruct Lord Manderley that he is to strengthen and repair all his defences at White Harbour, and see that they are well manned. And from this day on, I want a careful watch kept over Theon Greyjoy. If there is war, we shall have sore need of his father's fleet." War? The fear was plain on Catelyn's face. Ned tells her it will not come to war, and that Robert will believe him when he finds out the truth. And this is where Eddard IV, A Game of Thrones, ends. Now, when asked to work with Littlefinger, Ned thinks to himself, it would not be the first time that Ned had been forced to make common cause with a man he despised. Fans have tried to speculate who this might be, and if it might be connected to the Tower of Joy. However, it could really be anyone from Roose Bolton to the Lannisters. But it would be interesting if it was connected to Lyanna's "Promise me, Ned" moment. This chapter also introduces Littlefinger's debt scheme, where we think he has deliberately bankrupted the realm and planned for the Iron Bank of Braavos to call in all their outstanding loans so Littlefinger can bail out proud lords like the Waynwoods to secure valuable hostages like Harry the Heir in A Feast for Crows. Because Robert can't possibly be responsible for the amount of debt the crown has accumulated. The Hand's Tourney, which is stated to be ludicrously extravagant, costs 100,000 gold dragons, but the crown is in debt for 6 million dragons. In order to get 6 million in debt in 15 years, Robert would have had to have a tourney level expense every 3 months. And that's assuming the crown has no incomes. We don't know how much these incomes are, but we know that the crown wasn't in debt when Robert took over. Ned says that Aerys left a treasure flowing with gold, and revenues have grown massively in the intervening 15 years. Tywin says crown incomes are now 10 times higher than they were under Aerys. In Tyrion 4, A Storm of Sword. So this begs the question, where did all the money go? Well, the most likely answer is that immediately after Robert's rebellion, there were a lot of expenses, like rebuilding King's Landing, that did strain the crown's resources. Therefore, to solve the problem, Jon Arryn brought in Littlefinger, who he knew was good with money. Once master of coin though, Littlefinger rapidly realized 3 things. First, none of the people above him know or care anything about money, as long as they have enough of it. Second, if he solves the crown's financial problems, he becomes disposable. Third, if he makes the crown's finances look desperate, but still always manages to have enough money, he'll look like an indispensable genius. So, his goal to ensure that the crown's finances are in a state of perpetual crisis, he deliberately borrows money at exorbitant rates to stick the crown with the interest payments. He increases the crown's payroll as much as possible and auctions off officers. And of course, he steals as much as possible through overcharging, fake identities, double billing, and anything else he can think of. The end result is that the crown is broke. Littlefinger has accumulated a fortune worth millions of dragons, and no one is the wiser. This is supported by Jaime 1, A Feast for Crows, where we learn the crown is employing 20 turnkeys, 6 underjailers, a chief underjailer, a jailer, and a king's justice to guard 6 prisoners. Varys may have known what Littlefinger was doing, but stayed out of it because it fell into his plans to put his chosen Targaryen on the Iron Throne. Anyway, that's about it for Eddard 4, A Game of Thrones. In the next video, we'll cover Tyrion 3 and continue from there. In the meantime, here are some of the differences between the book and TV show. Ned's dialogue in the show is much more engaging. In the books, Lord Commander Barrister Selmy of the Kingsguard is present at the small council meeting, but he is absent in the show. This occurred because the writers didn't want Barristan to know that Jorah was a spy. There is also an additional scene in King's Landing, where Eddard confronts Jaime at the Iron Throne. Jaime describes the scene when he stabbed Aerys II Targaryen. In the books, the badge of the hand that Eddard uses is a clasp at the throat that clutches the cloak together. In the show, it is a brooch on the chest. The saying about the hand is changed as well. In the book, the saying is, "The king eats, the hand takes the shit." In the show, the saying is, "The king shits, and the hand wipes." In the show, Jaime says 500 knights watched both Brandon and Rickard Stark be burned alive. But in Catelyn 7, A Clash of Kings, we only learn of Jaime and Gerald Hightower being present for Aerys' trial by fire. So let's continue on with Tyrion 3, A Game of Thrones. This chapter is 4,386 words long and is told from the perspective of Tyrion Lannister, who was 25 years old at the start of A Song of Ice and Fire. Tyrion dines with high officers of the Night's Watch and promises Lord Commander Mormont that he will speak to the king of their need. Afterwards, Tyrion pays a final visit to the Wall, where Jon Snow asks him to do what he can to help his brother, Bran. Tyrion is dining with the high officers of the Night's Watch on his last night at Castle Black. Commander Mormont proclaims Tyrion a cunning man and asks him if he must leave so soon, saying that the Wall needs men like him. Tyrion brushes off the suggestion with an offer to scour the 7 kingdoms for dwarfs. An offended Sir Alliser Thorne claims that Tyrion mocks the Watch, but Tyrion counters that he is only mocking Sir Alliser. Thorne demands Tyrion makes his japes with steel in hand. Tyrion replies that he has steel in his hand, a fork which he brandishes against Thorne in a mock attack. A roar of laughter rises from the other officers, and Sir Alliser leaves in disgust. After claiming Sir Alliser's meal as his spoils of victory, Tyrion comments that a man like Sir Alliser should be mucking out the stable, not drilling the recruits. Mormont takes the opportunity to explain about the quality of his men. Sir Alliser is one of the few living knights to have taken the black. Sir Jeremy Riker goes on to explain that both he and Thorne fought for King Aerys II during the sack of King's Landing, and were forced to take the black or be executed by Tyrion's father, Lord Tywin Lannister. Tyrion's only comment is that his father is indeed very fond of heads on spikes. Tyrion asks for more wine, and Bowen Marsh comments that he has a great thirst for a small man. Maester Aemon states that Tyrion is a giant among them, at the edge of the world. He spoke softly, yet the high officers of the Night's Watch all fell quiet. Tyrion, speechless, calls the Maester kind. When they retire to the fire, Mormont informs Tyrion that he will receive an escort as far as Winterfell. Tyrion soon realizes that Mormont is working his way up to asking a favor, and so cuts right to it by asking if there is any way he can repay the Watcher's kindness. Mormont beseeches Tyrion to speak to King Robert about the condition of the Night's Watch and its need for men. Mormont goes on to elaborate on the high rate of disappearance among their ranging parties, including Sir Waymar Royce and Benjen Stark. The Watch's strength is now under 1,000 men, leaving only 3 men to guard each mile of the wall. Then Mormont laments that he is old and there is no one qualified to take over command, because the Watch has become an army of sullen boys and old men. He has maybe 20 men that can read, and fewer who can think or lead. Tyrion promises that he will tell the king, his father, and his brother, but he knows that it will do no good. Mormont then asks Tyrion how many winters he has seen. Tyrion replies with 9. Mormont adds that they have all been short. The long summer is ending, and portents say a long winter is coming. When Tyrion suggests the fabled endless summer may have come, Mormont insists the days are already growing shorter. Mormont then confides to Tyrion that the wildlings are massing and moving south, running scared from something worse than just the cold. Tyrion, bored by Mormont's dark words, reiterates his promises and leaves. Outside, it is bitter cold. As he walks the castle ground, Tyrion is taken by a whim to climb the wall one last time. His legs are cramping, too much to climb the stairs, so Tyrion takes the winch cage up. At the top, he meets Jon Snow with Ghost. As they walk, Tyrion asks how the recruits are doing under Jon's instruction. Jon tells him that they are getting better. Tyrion offers to carry any messages that Jon might have south to Winterfell, and is rewarded with a torrent of requests. Most of all, Jon wants Tyrion to help his crippled brother Bran. At first, Tyrion states that he has nothing to offer Bran, but Jon insists that words will be enough. When Tyrion agrees, Jon thanks him from the heart and calls him friend. Tyrion, deeply moved by the gesture, quips that while many of his kin are bastards, Jon is the first that he could call a friend, and they shake hands. They both look out over the haunted forest north of the wall. As they watch, Jon says that he has been watching for his uncle Benjen. Tyrion assures Jon that Benjen will return one day. If he doesn't come back, Jon Snow promised, Ghost and I will go find him. He put his hand on the direwolf's head. I believe you, Tyrion said. But what he thought was, and who will go find you? He shivered. And this is where Tyrion 3, A Game of Thrones ends. This chapter teases the idea someone is sending dreams to Mormont. You must make them understand, I tell you, my lord. The darkness is coming. There are wild things in the woods, direwolves and mammoths and snow bears the size of aurochs, and I have seen darker shapes in my dreams. In your dreams? Tyrion echoed. So, if someone is sending dreams to Mormont, could it be Bloodraven? Since we know Bloodraven can enter inside people's dreams and control ravens, which is something that Mormont's raven is suspected of doing by influencing events at the wall. I sent him out with 2 men I deemed as good as any in the watch. More fool, I. Fool, the raven agreed. Tyrion glanced up. The bird peered down at him with those beady black eyes, ruffling its wings. Fool, it called again. We'll be returning to the idea that Mormont's raven is subtly influencing the old bear and helped facilitate Jon's election to Lord Commander. For further reading, watch Preston Jacobs' The War of the Raven series, Part 4. But our belief is that Mormont's raven, ghost, and dreams are manipulating events at the wall. And that's about it for Tyrion 3, A Game of Thrones. In the next video, we'll cover Arya 2 and continue from there. In the meantime, here's the only real difference between the book and HBO TV show. In the show, Euron is introduced in conversation. With Tyrion at Castle Black rather than in the scene with 2 rapers as Jon is on his way to the wall, Benjen also appears in this scene. In the TV series, many of Mormont's lines were given to Maester Aemon in the scene with Tyrion. In the books, Aemon does appear in this scene, but he remains mostly in the background. Sir Alliser is also absent from the scene in the show. So, let's continue on with Arya 2, A Game of Thrones. This chapter is 2,699 words long, and is told from the perspective of Arya Stark, who was 9 years old at the start of A Song of Ice and Fire. In this chapter, unhappy with King's Landing, Arya abandons her dinner. Her father comes to her room to talk to her and sees she has Needle out. After a long talk, he decides not to take the sword away. Several days later, Arya meets her new dancing master. When her father enters the small hall after dinner has already begun, Arya can tell that he has been fighting with the council again. Jory Castle asks about the tourney everyone is talking about, and Eddard asks if anyone is talking about the Hand's displeasure with the whole idea. Sansa is tremendously excited by the prospect of a tourney, and begs to be allowed to attend. When Septa Mordain mentions his family will be expected to attend, Eddard concedes and agrees to ensure seats are provided for both Sansa and Arya. Knowing that Prince Joffrey will be there, Arya insists she does not want to attend a stupid tourney. When Sansa taunts that Arya would not be wanted anyway, Eddard loses his temper and threatens to change his mind. Quickly regaining his composure, Eddard excuses himself. Once he is gone, his guardsmen start talking excitedly about the tourney. No one talks to Arya, but she likes it that way. Back in Winterfell, she had enjoyed listening to the men talk, but now the sounds irritate her because she blames them, even her father, for doing nothing to save Lady and Micah. After looking disgustedly at her cold food and the people around her, Arya pushes away from the table. When Septa Mordane insists that Arya hasn't eaten, she runs to her chamber and locks herself in. She digs to the bottom of her chest where her sword Needle is hidden. Arya thinks that if she could climb like her brother Bran, she could steal some food and run away, and that if Jon Snow was there, she would not feel so lonely. A soft knock on her door proves to be her father, who says they need to talk and asks politely to come in. From the way he talks, Arya is ashamed to realize he is more sad than angry. When she lets him in, her father immediately notices her sword and asks whose it is. Arya explains that it is hers, and her father asks to see it. Her father notices Mikken's mark on the blade and remarks that if his 9-year-old daughter can be armed from his own forge without his knowledge, how can he be expected to rule the 7 kingdoms? Eddard asks who gave her the sword, but Arya stays silent, not wanting to betray Jon. Her father accepts this, but tells Arya that a sword is not a toy. When asked what she thinks Septa Mordane would say about her playing with a sword, Arya insists she was not playing. Eddard states that he should break the sword over his knee. Arya responds that Needle wouldn't break. The sword, having a name, amuses her father, who claims that Arya reminds him of his sister, Lyanna, who might have carried a sword if their father had allowed it. Arya is surprised when Eddard says she looks like her aunt, who was always described as beautiful, something never said of Arya. Eddard asks if Arya knows anything about how to use a sword, and she replies with the advice Jon gave her: stick him with the pointy end. She tells how she was trying to learn, and sadly adds that she asked Micah to practice with her. In grief, she starts to sob against her father's chest. He tells her that Micah's death was not her fault. Arya sobs that she hates them all: the Queen, the Hound, Joffrey, and the King. Then she adds that Joffrey lied, and that she also hates Sansa. Eddard says that everyone lies and that he does not believe the Nymeria ran off. Arya exclaims that Jory promised not to tell. Ned informs her that Jory did not, but that he figured it out. Because even a blind man could tell that the wolf would not have left willingly. Arya then explains how she and Jory had to throw rocks to drive the wolf away. She then asks her father if she did the right thing, and Eddard assures her that she did. Ned then tells Arya that winter is coming. He explains to her how wolves stick together, and that in the winter a lone wolf dies. Now, there are enemies threatening the Starks, so they must stick together like a pack of wolves, and it is time for her to start growing up. He hands Arya back her sword, saying she can keep it. He only asks that she not stick her sister. 3 days later, Arya is sent to the small hall by the steward. She is met by Syrio Forel, a former First Sword of Braavos. He tells her that he is her dancing master, and throws her a wooden sword, which she cannot catch. Unperturbed, Syrio tells Arya that the next day she will be there at midday and catch the blade. She picks the practice sword up as instructed and finds that it is very heavy. When she complains about the weight, Syrio explains that it is heavy to make her strong. Then he fixes her grip, telling her not to squeeze too tight. When Arya says that she might drop it, Syrio tells her that the sword must become a part of her arm, and that she cannot drop a part of her arm. When Syrio calls her a boy for the 3rd time, Arya objects. He insists that it does not matter, a sword has no gender. He then explains that what he will be teaching her is not the hacking and hammering iron dance of Westeros, but the swift and sudden water dance of Braavos. Then he tells her to try to strike him, and she tries unsuccessfully for 4 hours until every muscle is sore. The next day, the real work begins. And this is where Arya 2, A Game of Thrones, ends. Now, if Arya is similar to Lyanna Stark like Ned claims, there is also another theory. That at 14, Elia Sand behaves in a way similar to Lyanna, since they are both described as being half a horse each. Arya is told by Harwin, "You ride like a Northman, my lady. Your aunt was the same." Meanwhile, Elia is described as, "The girl was mad for horses," which might be why she often smelled like one, to the despair of her mother. This might explain how Lyanna was able to defeat 3 squires as the Knight of the Laughing Tree, and it was here where she first came into contact with Rhaegar Targaryen. Now, it is often presumed that Rhaegar pursued Lyanna, but what if it was the other way around? Elia is shown to be promiscuous. "I'll let you spank me though, but first you'll need to tilt with me and knock me off my horse." Arianna catches Elia kissing a man twice her age, so maybe Lyanna seduced Rhaegar, a man much older than herself, and with Ned describing Lyanna as beautiful and willful and dead before her. This would be an interesting subversion of the captured princess trope, with Lyanna being the real agent of her own abduction. And that's about it for Arya 2, A Game of Thrones. In the next video, we'll cover Daenerys 3 and continue from there. Now, here are the differences between the HBO TV show and book. In the show, the breakfast scene at King's Landing is extended with Arya stabbing the table. Eddard appears at the breakfast and gives Sansa a doll. Septa Mordane doesn't follow Arya into her bedroom. When Ned talks with Arya in the book, he does not defend Sansa's lies. In the show, Jory did not help Arya throw rocks at Nymeria. Meanwhile, Syrio Forel's appearance is different in the show. He has curly black hair instead of being bald. So let's continue on with Daenerys 3, A Game of Thrones. This chapter is 4,243 words long, and is told from the perspective of Daenerys Targaryen, who is 25 years younger than Rhaegar and 8 years younger than Viserys. In this chapter, Daenerys learns to embrace her life in Drogo's Khalasar, and stands up to Viserys for the first time. Afterwards, when Drogo arrives to have sex with her, she rides him instead of being taken from behind and becomes pregnant at age 14. Daenerys looks out for the first time onto the vast, empty, flat plain of the Dothraki Sea, with Ser Jorah Mormont beside her. Daenerys sees she has outdistanced the rest of Drogo's Khalasar, who are still climbing the ridge behind her. Among them, she can see her brother, Viserys, struggling with his riding. The sight brings back the memory of Illyroy Mopatis offering to let Viserys stay in Pentos as his guest. Viserys had refused and insisted on coming with the Khalasar to ensure that Drogo would give him the army that he promised. Daenerys commands Jorah and the others to wait. Mormont comments that she is starting to sound like a queen, but Daenerys corrects him, calling herself a Khaleesi. As she rides out alone, Dany reflects on how the days of the journey have hardened her body. She no longer has open saddle sores, nor does she suffer unbearable pain after a day's ride. At first, Drogo would ignore Daenerys to spend his days talking, drinking, and racing with his blood riders, leaving her to eat meals alone or with Viserys and Jorah Mormont. Yet every night, Drogo would come and ride her from behind. She had been miserable until she had dreamt of a dragon that engulfed her in flame and cleansed her. After that, each day had been easier than the one before it, and she had found pleasure in the new sights of the journey, even starting to enjoy sex with Drogo. Once she is alone, Daenerys decides to dismount and take off her boots so she can feel the earth. Suddenly, Viserys is there, screaming and grabbing her. He is furious that she commanded him to stay on the ridge with the others. For the first time in her life, Daenerys shoves him back. For a moment, Viserys is shocked, but then the rage returns, and Daenerys sees that he intends to hurt her badly. But then, Drogo's whip catches Viserys around the neck and pulls him to the ground. Her handmaid and Irri translate for them as Drogo asks if Daenerys would like to see Viserys dead or disfigured as punishment for his attack. Daenerys declines, but tells them to take Viserys' horse and make him walk, an emasculating punishment among the horse lords. Viserys, now recovered enough to shout, orders Ser Jorah to kill the Dothraki and discipline Daenerys, but the exiled knight ignores him and agrees that Viserys should walk. Daenerys is amazed that she hit her brother and asks Jorah if she has woken the dragon in Viserys. Jorah replies her brother Rhaegar was the last dragon, while her brother is less than the shadow of a snake. Daenerys insists Viserys is still the rightful king, but when Jorah asks if she would want her brother as the king, she realizes that he would not be a good king. Even so, Daenerys remains convinced that the people of Westeros are praying for Viserys' return until Jorah explains that peasants only pray for rain, health, and a summer that never ends. Daenerys declares that Viserys will never be able to retake the Seven Kingdoms, realizing that she has known this for a long time. Viserys could not lead an army even if her husband gave him one. Daenerys races her silver ahead of Jorah and the others. It is dusk by the time she returns to the Khalasar. Daenerys imagines the laughter in the Khalasar when news spreads about Viserys. By the time her brother can return, everyone will know him as a walker. As she enters her tent, Daenerys looks at her dragon eggs, and for a moment she sees a scarlet flames before her eyes. When she touches the eggs, they feel hot, which she attributes to the sunshine during the day. Daenerys remembers all of the stories about other magical creatures and wonders why there should not also be dragons. Her Dothraki handmaidens, Irri and Jiqui, tell her that dragons were all killed by brave men. However, her Lycian handmaiden, Dori, a former sex slave, tells Daenerys a story about a time when there were 2 moons in the sky, but one came too close to the sun and cracked to release the first dragons. The story ends by claiming one day the other moon will crack and the dragons will return. The other handmaidens make fun of the story, insisting that the moon is a goddess, not an egg. Daenerys sends Irri and Jiqui away, but orders Dori to stay with her for dinner. When Drogo returns, she takes him outside because Dothraki customs say everything of importance must be done under the open sky. When Drogo tries to take her from behind, Daenerys tells him that she wants to see his face and climbs on top of him. She rides Drogo as fiercely as she has ever ridden her horse. And in that moment of pleasure, Drogo calls out her name. On the far side of the Dothraki Sea, on her 14th name day, Daenerys' handmaiden Jiqui brushes her stomach and tells her that she is pregnant. And this is where Daenerys 3, A Game of Thrones, ends. Now this chapter introduces Ghostgrass, another apocalyptic event occurring in Planetos as described by Jorah. Down in the Shadowlands, beyond Ashai, they say there are oceans of ghostgrass, taller than a man on horseback, with stalks as pale as milk glass. It murders all other grass and glows in the dark with the spirits of the damned. The Dothraki claim that someday ghostgrass will cover the entire world, and then all life will end. Also in this chapter, if Viserys had just stayed in Pentos like Illyroy wanted, he probably would have survived. Since, as we'll find out in these next few Daenerys chapters, Jorah does an extremely bad job at keeping Viserys alive, unless this was on purpose. Now, the final piece of contention in this chapter is who was sending Daenerys these dragon dreams to keep her alive. When he was done, he would close his eyes and begin to snore softly, and Dany would lie beside him, her body bruised and sore, hurting too much for sleep. Day followed day, and night followed night, until Dany knew she could not endure a moment longer. She would kill herself rather than go on, she decided one night. Yet, when she slept that night, she dreamt the dragon dream again. Viserys was not in it this time. There was only her and the dragon. Its scales were black as night, wet and slick with blood. Her blood, Dany sensed. Its eyes were pools of molten magma, and when it opened its mouth, the flame came roaring out in a hot jet. She could hear it singing to her. She opened her arms to the fire, embraced it, let it swallow her whole, let it cleanse her and temper her and scour her clean. She could feel her flesh sear and blacken and slow away, could feel her blood boil and turn to steam. and yet there was no pain. She felt strong and new and fierce, and the next day, strangely, she did not seem to hurt quite as much. It was as if the gods had heard her and taken pity. Even her handmaids noticed the change. "Khaleesi," Jiqui said, "what is wrong? Are you sick?" "I was," she answered, standing over the dragon's eggs that Ilroy had given her when she wed. She touched one, the largest of the three, running her hand lightly over the shelf. Black and scarlet, she thought, like the dragon in my dream. The stone felt strangely warm beneath her fingers. She pulled her hand back nervously. From that hour onward, each day was easier than the one before it. Her legs grew stronger, her blisters burst, and her hands grew calloused. Her soft thighs toughened, supple as leather. Now, did Quaithe send that dragon dream, or was it someone else? That's about it for Daenerys 3, A Game of Thrones. In the next video we'll cover Bran 4 and continue from there. Now, here are the differences between the HBO TV show and book. In the book, Daenerys orders the Khalasar to stop, not because she feels sorry for the slaves, but because she is awed by the sight of the Dothraki Sea. In the show, Ricardo seems to be based on Drogo. Meanwhile, in the books, it is Daenerys who makes Viserys walk after he attacks her. An additional scene in the show has Ser Jorah and Ricardo discuss Dothraki weapons. Irri then appears and announces Daenerys' pregnancy. Jorah then goes off to inform Varys. Hi there, and welcome to A Song of Ice and Fire Explained. This is a video series where we explain the massive conspiracies going on in A Song of Ice and Fire. If you haven't seen our previous videos, we suggest watching those first. So let's continue on with Bran 4, A Game of Thrones. This chapter is 4,679 words long, and is told from the perspective of Bran Stark, who has awoken from his coma to find his mother, father, sisters, and Jon are all gone. In this chapter, Bran is roused from his depression and stories with Old Nan when he is called to the Great Hall of Winterfell to receive Tyrion Lannister. Despite Robb's rudeness, Tyrion provides plans for a saddle that will allow Bran to ride a horse once more. Bran watches from his window seat as Rickon plays with the direwolves in the yard below. Shaggy Dog's fur has darkened to black, and his eyes are fiery green. Summer has turned to silver and smoke, with yellow gold eyes that see everything. Summer is smaller and warier than Greywind, but Bran thinks he is the smartest. Bran realizes he is crying. He wants to be down there, laughing and running. Bitterly, he declares that the crow in his dream lied about being able to fly. Old Nan agrees that crows are all liars and offers to tell Bran a story about a crow, but Bran is not in the mood and snaps that he hates her stories. Old Nan explains that the stories are not hers since they come from before her and after. Bran remembers his father telling him that she was called Old Nan even when he was a child. Possibly the oldest person in the Seven Kingdoms, Nan has outlived all her own family except the simple-minded stable boy, Hodor. Bran insists he hates the stories no matter whose they are. Unperturbed, Old Nan offers to tell a story about a boy who hated stories. Bran does not want any stories. He wants his parents and to run and climb and ride like before. His father had promised he could ride a real horse south, but left without him. Bran broods on all the people who have left Winterfell and seem to have forgotten him. Only Robb and Rickon remain, and even Robb has changed. He never smiles now, and he is so busy as the Lord of Winterfell that he has little time for Bran. When Nan offers to tell him about Brandon the Builder, Bran insists that his favourite stories were the scarier ones. Nan replies, "Oh my sweet summer child, what do you know of fear?" Bran listens intently as Nan begins the story of the first time the others came in the darkness of winter, thousands and thousands of years ago. A winter fell like no other, a night that lasted a generation. In that darkness came the others, cold, dead things that hated fire, iron, the touch of the sun, and every creature with warm blood. They overran holdfasts and cities, and no swords could stop their advance. Even women and children were not spared, and the others ate the flesh of children. This was before the Andals and the Rhonar had come, when the first men lived in the lands they had taken from the children of the forest. The last hero set out to find the children with his sword a dog, his horse, and 12 companions. All of the hero's companions, and even his dog, died, and he was left in despair of ever finding the children as the others closed in. Old Nan's story is interrupted by Maester Luwin, who tells Bran that he is needed in the Great Hall to greet Tyrion Lannister and some men of the Night's Watch, who are down from the wall with a message from his brother Jon. Bran complains that he wants to hear the rest of Nan's story, but Nan tells him that stories can wait. Hodor carries Bran down to the hall, with Maester Luwin struggling to keep up. Robb is sitting in his father's high seat, wearing his armor with his sword across his lap. Even Bran knows what it means to greet a guest with an unsheathed sword, and can feel the hostility in the room. Robb makes a point of only offering his welcome to the men of the Night's Watch. The meaning is not lost on Tyrion, who notes that he is not welcome and calls Robb a boy. Robb seethes, insisting that he is a lord. Tyrion responds that if that is so, he needs to show a lord's courtesy. When Bran is brought forward, Tyrion notes that the news of his survival was true and declares that the Starks are hard to kill. Robb declares that the Lannisters had best remember that and lifts Bran into the high seat. Tyrion asks how Bran fell, but Bran insists that he never falls. Luwin is quick to add that Bran does not remember. Tyrion calls this curious, then asks if Bran likes to ride. Immediately, the Maester insists that Bran has lost the use of his legs and so cannot ride. Tyrion responds that with the right saddle and horse, even a cripple can ride. Angered, Bran insists that he is not a cripple. But Tyrion retorts that if that is true, then he is not a dwarf. Tyrion hands the Maester a paper containing plans he has drawn up for a saddle for Bran. Luwin states it will work and he should have thought of it himself. Tyrion responds that the idea came easier to him, since the design is similar to his own saddle. Robb is suspicious of Tyrion's motive, to which Tyrion replies that Jon asked it of him, and he has a weak spot for cripples, bastards, and broken things. Rickon comes in from outside with 3 direwolves, who immediately start growling and surround Tyrion. Theon comments that the wolves do not like Tyrion's smell. Tyrion says that it is time he took his leave, but the wolves assault him before he can move more than a step. They are called off in time by the boys. Tyrion finds the hostility of the wolves to be interesting and states nothing is harmed save his dignity. Even Robb is shaken and says he does not know why the wolves attacked. Before Tyrion can leave, Maester Luwin confers with Robb, who then offers the hospitality of Winterfell to Tyrion. Tyrion declines the invitation as a false courtesy, declaring that he will stay in the inn outside the wall. Robb then tells the Night's Watch men they have rooms prepared and invites them for dinner. Bran is looking forward to feasting that night with the Night's Watch. In his room, Bran expresses his excitement at being able to ride again to summer. Bran dreams of climbing and sees the shapes of twisted and grotesque gargoyles whispering. The gargoyles pull themselves free and climb towards Bran, who screams, shouting that he did not hear. This dream is Bran's repressed memories of his fall, with the Lannister twins being represented by 2 gargoyles that Bran clung onto before his fall. Bran wakes to find Hodor above him, who clean, dresses, and carries him down to the Great Hall. That evening, Robb and Bran host the Night's Watch men for dinner. The Black brothers bring the dire tidings of Benjen Stark. Yoren states that Benjen is probably dead, but Robb disagrees. One of the brothers assures them that Benjen knows the haunted forest better than anyone and will find his way back. Bran thinks of old Nan's stories and blurts out that Uncle Benjen will be saved by the children of the forest. Maester Luwin tells him the children have been dead for thousands of years. But Yoren disagrees, wondering who's to say what lives beyond the wall. That night, Robb carries Bran up to his bed himself. Robb sits by Bran for a long time and tells him that they will find a horse for him. Bran asks if the others will be coming back. Robb says yes, with much hope in his voice. Robb then tells Bran that he can meet his mother riding his new horse, and later they can visit the wall together. And this is where Bran 4, A Game of Thrones, ends. So it seems as though every culture in A Song of Ice and Fire has a prophesized savior. For the First Men, Starks, and the North, their prophesied savior is the last hero. For the Valyrians or Targaryens, it is the prince that was promised. For the Dothraki, it is the stallion who mounts the world, and for the worshippers of R'hllor and people of Essos, it is Azor Ahai. So it seems as though every culture worships the coming of a divine savior who will save the world. But where exactly these prophecies come from is the real mystery. And if Old Nan is suspicious of crows and calls them liars, then I think we, as the readers, should be suspicious too. And that's about it for Bran 4, A Game of Thrones. In the next video, we'll cover Eddard 5 and continue from there. Now, here are the differences between the HBO TV show and book. Bran is more pessimistic in the show. He repeats the sentence, "I'd rather be dead." The scene of the wolves attacking Tyrion and the feast with the men of the Night's Watch is also cut from the show. Anyway, that's it for today's episode. If you want to see more of A Song of Ice and Fire Explained, please like, share, and subscribe. Also, when you get the chance, try out Fantasy Flight's A Game of Thrones board game, digital edition.